Assalomu alaykum. Bugun biz KUN.UZda yangi loyihaga qo'l urmoqdamiz va bugungi loyihamizning birinchi mehmoni Buyuk Britaniyaning O'zbekistondagi favqulodda va muxtor elchisi janob Christopher Allan.
Assalomu alaykum.
Assalomu alaykum. Mr. Allan joined the FCO in 2000 and he has worked across a range of foreign policy issues in FCO, including the security policy, the environment in Afghanistan and Pakistan. He worked in the British Embassy in Tokyo 2003 to 2006 and as a head of the South Asia Group in FCO from 2009 and 10. His most recent appointment was in Addis Ababa, where he was the deputy head mission from 2011 and 2014. Now he's the ambassador of the Her Majesty Queen and the government of the UK in Tashkent. Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador.
Good afternoon.
First of all, let me express my gratitude to you and to the embassy of the UK in Tashkent to have this warm receipt.
It's a great pleasure. It's good to see you.
Let me start our interview with the first question. What were your perceptions about Uzbekistan before you were appointed to be ambassador in Tashkent?
So I've been fascinated by Uzbekistan and Central Asia for over 20 years. I remember as a student getting really interested in this part of the world, a part of the world which was frankly during the time of the Soviet Union not very well known in Western countries such as the UK. When I travelled after university, I started to read books about Uzbekistan and Central Asia. A great book by a travel writer, a British writer, called Colin Thubron, on the Lost Heart of Asia it was called. Another one called The Road to Oxiana by Robert Byron. I became very keen to visit. I actually tried to in about 1998. It didn't work out for very long and complicated reasons, but I've ever since then remained very keen to, if at all possible, end up working here for the Foreign Office. Of course, once I got the job, as I did 2 or 3 years ago, I was incredibly pleased and began to learn Russian in order to be posted here. In doing so, I was actually taught Russian by an Uzbek lady, who was one of my teachers from Samarkand, and of course I began to read very intensively everything I could about Uzbekistan, meet Uzbek diplomats in London, and so I suppose by the time I arrived here, I had, I think, a reasonably good sense of what to expect.
Yes, as you've been working in Uzbekistan for several years, we may say you're a senior diplomat, you're a senior foreign diplomat here. What are the changes you've been witnessing here?
Well, it's been a very interesting time to be here as a diplomat, as you say. I've been here for exactly 2 years, so I had been here for around a year when the first president, His Excellency Islam Karimov, very sadly passed away. That has allowed me to see, I suppose, the extent of the changes that have taken place in Uzbekistan over the last year. And it's been quite remarkable to see the impact of those changes, and the changes are having an impact very clearly economically, and I think in terms of people's lives already. To give some examples, I think for foreign partners, particularly for our businesses and investors, crucially important has been the change on currency convertibility.
Yes, sure.
So increasing the access that people have to foreign currency makes our investors a lot more interested, because it means that if they invest in Uzbekistan, then when the time comes to import stuff from overseas or repatriate some of their profits, they're able freely to do so, as they would expect to be able to do in any other market. I think another very important change to take place over the last year has been the improvement in relationships between Uzbekistan and its immediate neighbours in Central Asia. That's something that the United Kingdom very, very warmly welcomes. It's clear that this region has a great deal to gain in terms of security and stability, but also in terms of economic opportunities, trading opportunities, and in terms of just people-to-people links, improving the potential for people and families to travel across borders. For all of those reasons, it's a really important development in the region, and one that, as I say, we're very warmly supporting. You know, I think in all of these changes, President Mirziyoyev, through the National Development Strategy, has set out a very impressive level of ambition. There's clearly a lot of energy being directed into trying to deliver changes across all those different areas described in the development strategy. And it won't necessarily be the case that everything will be delivered over the course of the 5 years. And I think Uzbekistan's international partners understand that, but nonetheless welcome the level of ambition that's being proposed. And in terms of seeing the reforms through, I think everybody that has a stake in them will need to be patient, because some of them will happen faster than some others, and you can't hope to change everything at once. There's only a certain number of civil servants, there's only a certain capacity that any government has to deliver those changes. But it will be important to see the course, not to get frustrated, and to finish off what has been started, exactly as is proposed in the development strategy. For our part in the UK, we want to do what we can to help. And we're already building up our financial programs, mainly to help providing expertise and support to the parts of the Uzbek government that ask us for it, or that ask the international community for best practice in a certain area of reform. And we feel that's the most important area that we can work in, supporting Uzbekistan in the coming years.
As you travel to the regions of Uzbekistan a lot as diplomat, and you was, if I'm not mistaken, it was your first visit to Fergana Valley, and then recently Surxondaryo, Termiz, or another city parts of Uzbekistan. How do you define the local people's lifestyle, their socio-economic, living style, living conditions there? What should be changed? What has to be changed in further years?
Well, firstly, I do think it's incredibly important that ambassadors, that diplomats get outside the capital city and have conversations with people other than the usual ministry counterparts.
Yes.
I think it's too easy for diplomats to sit in Tashkent, to give the Uzbek example. And so I've made a special effort, really from very soon after I arrived in Uzbekistan, to visit the regions of the country. And I think I've now visited, at least passed through or spent some time in every region in the country. And I'm very pleased to have done so, because it's a fascinating and beautiful country, and one can only really begin to understand it once you spend a good amount of time outside Tashkent. You know, as the president himself has made very clear in the course of his own travels around Uzbekistan, I think it's clear that the socio-economic conditions in which people live do vary quite a lot around the country. And there are some parts of the country where finding a job is really very difficult,
yes,
where large numbers of people have to migrate out of the country, or where those that haven't migrated are subsisting on really quite low incomes, or on the remittances sent back from overseas. I think it's obvious that that is an important reason why the government is prioritising economic reform, job creation, and encouraging the private sector as key planks of reform. And that seems right to us. Wherever you look in the world, jobs are created primarily in today's world through the private sector, through the growth of not just big companies, but small and medium-sized companies, and through entrepreneurship. And of course, a lot of that needs investment as well. And so encouraging foreign investors to come into the country, including ones from the UK, is, I think, also an important part of the solution.
As we're talking about the investments and trade relations, how do you see the future relationship between UK and Uzbekistan in terms of the economy, in terms of the investment relations and trading between the private sectors?
Well, growing, and I view it optimistically. We have, just coming up at the end of November, a major annual bilateral meeting that we call the Uzbek-British Trade and Industry Council. And it alternates between Tashkent and London. It will take place in London on the 29th of November. We're very pleased that Foreign Minister Kamilov will be in London for this event and for a wider bilateral visit, but also that Uzbekistan will again be represented by a very large senior delegation of ministers, of senior officials from state-owned enterprises and so on. For the UK's side, we will also have ministerial representation and a large number of private business people. I'll be back myself, and we will be hoping to see good new business trading opportunities coming out of that major set-piece event. Trade between the UK and Uzbekistan is currently too low. In fact, if you go back, say 10 or 15 years, there were a lot more British companies here in Uzbekistan, and trade volumes between our countries were higher than they are now. The message is getting out there to British businesses, as it is around the world, that the business environment in Uzbekistan is improving. I think there's still some way to go, and I think it's really important that the government here continues to focus hard on making sure that the business environment in Uzbekistan is as good as possible. Because in the end, this is an international competition. And in the end, if our businesses are looking around the world, they will want to invest in the most attractive destinations. But we do see huge potential here at the moment, and we see more interest from British businesses. So I'm hoping that, including through this major event at the end of November, we'll see a big boost to our bilateral trade ties in the near future.
We look also forward to this event. As it happens with all the fields of the relations, it's all developing and growing now. That months ago it was announced that BBC Media, British BBC Media, is coming to Uzbekistan and relaunches its office in Tashkent, but it has gone with the words that we didn't see any updates or news that appearing here in the office, in the Tashkent.
So firstly, I think it's really important for Uzbekistan that the diversity of media reporting on this country increases a bit. I think the Uzbek media does a good job, and it's good to see that there are a number of other international media outlets, journalists present here, but actually the numbers are still very few. So one of the things that I have been encouraging the government of Uzbekistan to think about since I arrived here is accrediting more international correspondents. That can only help ensure full and accurate coverage of Uzbekistan in the international media, which is something that I think is really important and hasn't always necessarily been the case. Now, the BBC is one good example of a media organisation I think it would be great to have in Uzbekistan. The BBC, just so that everyone is clear, is an entirely editorially independent organisation. It's not part of the British government. It's funded uniquely through what we call a licence fee that people pay to watch television in the UK, as well as increasingly through online content and some advertising. So it's very much an independent organisation. But you're right that they, over the course of the summer, went through an exercise to recruit a correspondent to work here in Uzbekistan. And my understanding is that the accreditation of that correspondent is currently in process.
And does it mean that reforms in Uzbekistan, social, political reforms in Uzbekistan are facing to the model of the Western countries or the states?
Yeah, I think Uzbekistan is becoming a more open country in quite a number of different respects, including some positive developments in the area of freedom of media and freedom of speech. You'll know that last week the OSCE held for the first time in many years its conference on media freedom in Central Asia here in Tashkent. Just the invitation to hold that conference in Tashkent, I think, was a very positive step on the part of the government of Uzbekistan. We see in social media and online media in particular really quite vigorous debate now about important issues for the people of Uzbekistan. We see increasingly live debate, even on television, including in the International Press Club, which again I think is a very positive development. But if I'm being honest, I think if you compare to some other countries, there's still quite a few steps to take in terms of full freedom of speech and debate in Uzbekistan. To give one example, the extent to which the Uzbek media is likely ever to criticize the government and the president in particular remains limited. That's not to say that I would encourage loads of criticism. I think in particular the reform program is a very positive development. But encouraging a culture of open debate does generally also mean including the potential for criticism of anybody and everybody. And that atmosphere, certainly we find in our country, is a very healthy way to promote new ideas and to promote a healthy political culture that in the medium or longer term better provides for better policy, better governance and more stability and economic strength.
Of course. We've seen that this year the number of winners from the Achieving Scholarship are getting more and more. This encourages, motivates Uzbek students to have a better condition, to have fundings from the side of the government of UK, and they will have a chance to study for free. On the other hand, local universities, local educational higher system in Uzbekistan are getting lower and lower by the quality, by the quantity, and by their methods. How do you see that position? How do you see this condition in Uzbekistan that educational system hasn't been sounded for the reforms?
Well, firstly, let me, as you've mentioned them, focus on Achieving scholarships, because we are right now welcoming applications for those scholarships this year. And it's an amazing opportunity for Uzbek nationals who feel that they have the potential to be leaders in their fields in the country, to go to the UK, to study for a master's course for a year, and then to come back to Uzbekistan and apply their knowledge and their new expertise for Uzbekistan's future. It's a fully funded, fully paid, generous scholarship, and 8 places is a good number of places to be able to offer to Uzbekistan, and we want to see the best possible candidates. We feel it's a big investment in the future of Uzbekistan, and so I'd very warmly encourage anybody interested to apply, as long as they have a couple of years work experience and a bachelor's degree already. And you can find the full details on the British Embassy website or our Facebook page. Secondly, I don't necessarily recognize your characterization of the higher education system in Uzbekistan. I think it is tremendously important for the future of the country to focus very hard on higher education and on ensuring the most capable possible workforce. Again, it's about being competitive, and to be competitive in the modern world, ensuring really good quality higher education, education at all levels, is really important. Now, amongst the higher education reforms with which I'm familiar, I know that one of the key areas of focus is building international partnerships. And that's certainly something that we warmly welcome. Through the British Council here in Uzbekistan, we already facilitate quite a lot of interactions and exchanges between Uzbek universities and British universities, and between the Uzbek Ministry of Higher and Specialised Education and counterparts in the UK, who come here to help advise and help support reforms on higher education. So to give you some examples, they work on curriculum reform, they work on ensuring quality assurance in higher education, they work of course on English language teaching, and they work on including information technology best practice, on including that in the way that university teaching happens. Plus we have already in Uzbekistan Westminster International University Tashkent, and Leicester University, which has recently signed a memorandum of understanding with the University of World Economy and Diplomacy, and active discussions are going on between those institutions on their partnership going forward. So we in the UK feel that our education partnership with Uzbekistan is a really important part of our bilateral relationship, and want to do everything we can to support the further development and strengthening of the higher education sector here.
The ambassador represents Her Majesty the Queen and the UK government in the country to which they are appointed. They are responsible for the direction of BUYUK, the embassy and its consulates, including political work, trade, investment, press and cultural relations, and visa and consular services. To name these responsibilities, how does it feel to be a good diplomat for you?
Well, it's a heavy responsibility. I mean, above all, as a diplomat, one represents one's country, and I'm very proud to do that. I would say that there is no job I'd rather do. It feels to me a great privilege, a great honour to serve my country, to represent Her Majesty the Queen and my fellow citizens overseas, especially in a country as fascinating, wonderful, hospitable and altogether brilliant as Uzbekistan. What else does being a diplomat mean for me? It means certainly here in my job in Uzbekistan being visible. If I'm to represent the UK, then I should be out there, not just sitting in my office. I should be conducting interviews with the media, I should be travelling the country, I should be engaging with the government, absolutely, but also with the business community, with the non-government organisations, with the normal people of Uzbekistan. All those connections, that network is extremely important for any diplomat. Being a diplomat is also about understanding the country that you're based in, because diplomats are representing their own country overseas, but they're also explaining the country in which they work back to, in my case, London, back to their capital, back to their own government and stakeholders. And so it's tremendously important for any diplomat, particularly for an ambassador, to get to understand Uzbekistan, in this case, better than anybody else in the United Kingdom. I should be the person that embodies the bilateral relationship and that understands and is able to describe, explain, inform people in the UK about developments in Uzbekistan better than anybody else. So I think those are probably the key things that as a diplomat or as an ambassador I need to be doing.
Mr. Ambassador, what Uzbek dish would you have without doubt any time in here?
Well, you were expecting me to say plov.
It's up to you.
I love plov, but actually I go for samsa. I love samsa. I love their diversity because I find in Uzbekistan I get a lot of meat to eat, particularly lamb. Beef, and so while I like meat samsas, obviously jizak samsas are particularly celebrated and very tasty. I actually quite like pumpkin samsas or spinach samsas as a nice alternative option. My wife is a vegetarian, so as we travel Uzbekistan, it's often very hard to find vegetarian dishes, especially if only local cuisine is available. So samsa stikvoy is a favorite option for not just me, but for all the family.
And your passion for books. What's your favorite top 5 books?
Favorite top 5 books? Well, let's see.
You like to read at all?
I absolutely love to read. Although, very sadly, I'm so busy with my work that very rarely, unless I'm on holiday, do I get the chance to read a novel or non-fiction book as opposed to something more relevant to work. But my favourite book of all time is Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. I'm sure it will be well known to everybody watching. I read it first when I was 8, when I was probably a little too young to read it, but my father, others in my family were so enthusiastic about it that I couldn't wait to read it. I think I've read it, I don't know, maybe half a dozen times since then, and I've loved it every time. It's one thing that I would say is really important to anybody thinking about that book is to read it before you watch the films. Like so many books, unless you have the chance to imagine the characters for yourself, you'll only, when you read the book, populate the book with the people you've seen in the films. And
see the whole scene there.
Exactly. So you read it before you watch it. Others I'd mention, Alexandre Dumas, French novelist, wrote a wonderful book called The Count of Monte Cristo, which again was a book I read in my early teenage years and is one of the greatest adventure stories. The Scots dialect, I'm from Edinburgh, I'm from Scotland. It's a very gritty story, a very real story about social problems faced by drug addicts, poor people in parts of Edinburgh that had a very, very low standard of living back at that time. But in that sense, it gave voices to people that didn't have voices in our society at that time, and it was quite a revolutionary book. It very much spoke of a certain period in Scottish society. It's also very, very funny, so I definitely recommend that one. There's a book called One Day by David Nichols, also made into a film. It's a wonderful love story. The characters in it, the lead two characters, just have lots of different things in common with me and my wife. We were engaged even in the same place that the characters in the book get engaged. We went to university in the same places. There are lots and lots of things that were very familiar to us from that book, so it's very meaningful to me. And finally, a book I mentioned earlier, there's a book called The Road to Oxiana by Robert Byron, which is a classic of travel writing, British travel writing. And it features some young British men in the 1930s, I think, who sought to drive all the way to Uzbekistan. It's a very unusual book. And again, a real classic of travel writing that isn't as well known as it should be.
Nice. And what's the greatest lesson you have learned in life?
Wow. So it's a big question. Look, I think for me the key is balance. Balancing the most important things in your life, I have found is the best route towards happiness. So that means having a really fulfilling job and working hard at it. I enjoy working hard, I find it fulfilling. But also spending time with one's family and friends is an important part of being a human that, you know, if you neglect, you, in my experience, will not be happy. And I find some of my most rewarding times are when I do spend time at the weekends and on holidays with my family and friends. And also for me, actually, getting enough exercise. I'm quite physical. I ride my bike to work every day. I like to get out climbing in the mountains near Tashkent. I love to play football. And unless I'm doing all of those things often enough, I'll find that I get frustrated and I feel that a part of my identity in my life isn't there. So doing all of those things and more, but you know, those are for me some of the most important things in the right balance is my greatest lesson.
And what failure do you always remember and admire from your life experience?
Amongst my own failures, I think, you know, there was a point in my career in which I didn't pass a promotion exam that I probably tried to sit when I was a bit too young. And I learned an awful lot from that failure, including things that I think have made me a better manager and a better leader. Things to do with giving everybody around you space to express their own views, and things to do with being actually assertive when you need to be in a leadership position in the right ways. So we often talk about flexing one's style as a leader in modern kind of leadership thinking, and I think that failure helped me concentrate more on flexing my style to suit the particular occasion, be it a leadership occasion, internally or externally. That's been a really valuable lesson.
Bugungi suhbatdoshimiz Buyuk Britaniyaning O'zbekistondagi favqulodda va muxtor elchisi Christopher Allan bo'ldi. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for your warm wishes and your thinkings and expressions with Uzbekistan and UK relations. As you're here as ambassador, as a foreign diplomat and a representative of the UK government and nation, we also admire your time and your speech here.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. I've enjoyed the conversation and happy to do it again anytime.